Hello, everyone. I am Jared Barnhart, Customer Experience Team Lead with Cellebrite and the host of this UpLIFT podcast. UpLIFT is all about sharing stories, best practices, and delving into the important mission of doing everything we can to protect children. I'm joined today by Lieutenant Eric Kinsman, Commander of the New Hampshire ICAC Task Force, one of the first established task forces across the U.S. Eric, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. I appreciate you having me on.
Sure thing. Do a quick intro yourself. Let our listeners know who you are.
Yeah, so Eric Kinsman, current commander for the New Hampshire ICAC Task Force. I've been in law enforcement for 25 years now at this point. Kind of diverse background. Most of my career was in patrol, doing various duties there in K-9 and our regional SWAT team, and then got involved and got promoted. Stayed in patrol and then got an opportunity to get into an administrative role as a lieutenant. Stayed there for a few years doing accreditation and internal affairs, and then had an opportunity to get back into casework again, and was offered the opportunity to come to back to ICAC and work as the commander. So I definitely jumped on it. I've been here as the commander for 4 years now, and loving every second of it.
Very cool. Yeah, that's certainly a diverse police career you have there. I feel like maybe the longtime SWAT guys don't end up being the ICAC commander that frequently.
Yeah,
So,
right. Well, eventually get to the point where your body isn't keep up with your mind. So my mind thought I could still keep up with the young guys, but my body was telling me otherwise. So it was a good time to step down.
very good. All right. Before we get started, I'll do a quick note about UpLIFT, what it is, and why we're having this discussion. So UpLIFT is part of Cellebrite's philanthropic initiative, Operation Find Them All, or we tend to call it OFTA for short, which is a collaboration between Cellebrite and some of our key philanthropic partners. Those partners include the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and which is an organization that most listeners are probably familiar with via cyber tips and other cases where they assist. But it was co-founded by John Walsh, who dedicated his life to helping missing, endangered, and exploited children. Our other partner is the Exodus Road, an organization who works internationally to rescue and help survivors of human trafficking, many of whom are children. And they've helped hundreds with their walk to freedom. Work very closely with Matt Parker, one of the co-founders there. Great guy, great organization. And lastly, we have Raven, a nonprofit that focuses on the policy side, hoping to transform America's response to child exploitation. Historically, legislature is always well behind the needs of law enforcement and the crimes occurring. So Raven is helping to push that mission forward. Now, Eric, I know that the policy side is super important, and Raven is working hard to get more funding to task forces like yours. So let's start there. Since 2018, New Hampshire's ICAC has seen a 275% increase in cyber tips, and you're serving 2 to 3 search warrants a week on criminals targeting children. Can you give us a realistic assessment of what's going on the ground in New Hampshire?
Yeah, and I absolutely, I'll certainly preface it by saying I don't think that New Hampshire is unique. I mean, as task force commanders, we communicate with one another regularly, and so unfortunately, it's not just things that are happening here in New Hampshire, but across the country. But the dramatic increase has really become attributed to a few different reasons. One of them is being that there's basically more and more apps that are developed every single day. There's more and more ways in which children can interact with each other online. It's become more socially acceptable and more of the norm in terms of having relationships and discussions and everything happening through social media as opposed to like an in-person. And then unfortunately, we're also seeing younger and younger child victims. We always used to see 12 to 17 was sort of that age bracket in terms of the kids that we dealt with and seeing victimized. And unfortunately, we see kids that are younger and younger. And then self-production cases have become a major issue as well. And these are cases where, without necessarily being provoked by a child predator on the other end, children are getting a hold of devices, whether it's old devices that have been passed down from their parents, or they have iPads or whatever it might be, and they're producing their own material because they think it's normal and accepted behavior, and then uploading it to whatever platform they're on. So it's sort of this multi-pronged, multiple reasons why we're seeing such a dramatic increase. And it never really has slowed down since the pandemic.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like at least for myself as a parent during the pandemic, I was far more apt to allowing my kids more time on devices just because, trying to figure it out and get through it. But I don't know if how long it's going to take for us to really see the long-term impact of that adjustment of the comfort on devices for everybody in that time.
Right.
And you made one point, and I like to always sort of pitch the concept of as a father, if I'm sitting there, in a public place and I see someone approaching my child, I'm going to, immediately sort of stand up, pay attention, intercede. Like I'm quick to act. And one thing that we're facing now as parents is that my kid is sitting right next to me on the couch at the other end, and that same concept is happening, but it's happening at their fingertips and hidden within their device. And it's sometimes impossible to see as parents if you're not coming up with some really constructive way to have that conversation around, that behavior and interaction. So
Yeah. I mean,
definitely tough.
yeah. And, it's one of the things that we stress with every time we bring new investigators on the task force. It's something that we stress in terms of, like, and we tell this to parents, we don't have to take a poll to get an accurate understanding of what we think of these child predators. We all know that they're sort of like the worst of the worst in terms, of people. But as investigators, if you don't give credence to how good they are at their tradecraft and their skill set, then you're going to miss something along the way, and the victims are going to be the ones paying for it. That they're very, very good at what they do, and they're very, very savvy, and so it's important that we understand that as investigators.
For sure. So with the many hurdles that your investigators have to face, what is the biggest hurdle that you face as a commander?
Well, it's certainly the volume of cases. It's tough to, at the end of the day, I wish I could say that we can get to every single cyber tip and every single case and referral that we get, we address and we're able to investigate. We just can't. I could quadruple, my budget and my resources tomorrow and still barely be able to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
So the biggest challenge, the biggest hurdle is to address that volume. And then also to keep up with the technology. If here in New Hampshire, we rely very heavily on the participation and the cooperation with our affiliate agencies. So there are some affiliate agencies just based on population, that they catch a regular amount of cyber tips and they have, a good amount of detectives like in their cyber division. But there's other smaller agencies who, through no fault of their own, they aren't equipped enough to handle these cyber tips investigations or these ICAC investigations, simply because they haven't been able to keep up with the technology of it. They may have run an ICAC case 6 months ago, but sometimes the manner in which you investigate these changes, and then just like every other law enforcement agency, staffing becomes a major issue for us as well.
Right.
We have a lot of smaller agencies, especially up in the northern part and western parts of our state. And, these agencies sometimes are suffering when it comes to staffing. So you may have a detective who's qualified in running an ICAC investigation, but unfortunately they're getting pulled from their detective duties to work open, patrol shifts at night, for example. And so sometimes these cases sit longer than they should be.
So you provoked some thought there for me. Resources are down, manpower's down. With the exponential growth of sort of digital evidence and these types of investigations, and I mean, we're not going to see it slow down. It's only going to continue to amplify. Have you seen, I guess, in the administrative side, the conversations around resources being multiplied in the same way? I often ask, like, if you had 100 more homicides in your state than you did the year before, wouldn't someone call a timeout and say, what changed and how do we need to adjust to make sure that this number doesn't grow another, next year? While all the while we've kind of watched the exponential growth in this arena, and we haven't just thrown the resources at it that we would if it were potentially a couple different other crime types. Have you seen anything around that?
Yeah, there has. I mean, I'm very fortunate. We have a tremendous amount of support for ICAC here in New Hampshire. So in addition to the regular federal ICAC grant that we receive, like every other ICAC task force receives, we also receive additional funding from the state of New Hampshire to support the ICAC task force, and that helps us basically keep the lights on and
Yeah.
allow us to continue to investigate these cases. So it's allowed me to hire additional people, purchase additional equipment, such as the equipment that we use from Cellebrite, and it's allowed us to be able to kind of, basically improve our abilities to address these crimes. Overtime reimbursement is another way in which I can kind of dangle that carrot in front of the agency in order to investigate these crimes in a timely fashion. So we have the ability that as long as as long as they're working on an ICAC related case, if they're doing that in overtime, then I can reimburse that agency for the overtime it costs them. So
Yes.
sort of a win-win for both, because we're getting the
Sure.
cases we're investigating, and it's not costing the affiliate agency any money to do so.
Very
So
cool.
we never exactly shut the door on being open-minded to try to figure out other creative ways in which we can get these cases done, but it's a constant uphill battle.
Sure. Well, it seems that I guess with all good, there's got to be some negative effect as well. So I want to hash this out with you. Recently, the Report Act was passed, which means that online platforms must report CSAM. I want to be super excited, but the problem that you just cited before we're talking about this is the volume and trying to keep up with it. So
Right.
assuming that this is going to increase the volume, are you encouraged by this? What do you think about this Report Act?
Well, I'm encouraged by it simply because another facet of the Report Act is the increases in amount of time in which they're required to maintain records, because of the volume of cases that, as a whole, that NCMEC is cyber tips that NCMEC is issuing out. We're in the 30s of millions of tips. I think it was 37 million tips last year in 2023. So given the volume of cases that are sitting out there, it's really imperative that we get the cooperation from these electronic internet service providers for maintaining and keeping records. So, by the time we get a cyber tip, that we're not necessarily behind the 8 ball when it comes to a timeline and where we run the risk of losing records. So, I mean, that's something I'm definitely happy to see. I certainly agree with you that, it's like almost be careful what you wish for, because you're going to see that increase in volume. But again, we try very hard, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find an ICAC investigator who wouldn't agree with me on this, is that protecting the victims is always the main focus. We always try to keep our eye on the ball on that. And so that being said, while it will certainly increase our volume in cases, it also gives us the ability to hopefully identify and help more victims. And again, I think that by virtue of the fact that you're working ICAC to begin with, I think you're almost accept the fact and you're okay with the fact that you're fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah.
But when you remember that every single time you help to identify or save another child victim, then it made a difference of that one child victim, and that you just do the best you can, and it's the same thing. You could argue the same thing when it comes to AI technology. I don't want to kind of get off the rails, but, states, I think there's 41 states that have legislation currently in their state legislatures about broadening the definition and broadening their child sexual exploitation laws to address the AI technology. So again, that too, if those bills get passed, that will increase our ability, or that will increase the volume of cases that we see. But we've already seen cases in other parts of the country where previously convicted previously convicted child predators who are current sexual offenders are getting back in the game again and dealing only with AI-related child sexual abuse material because they know they can't get convicted because it's not technically a real person. So these changes in laws will help address that, because again, we want to address the behavior that's being perpetuated, and again, with the hopes about stopping the behavior.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that topic is something that we're doing some research on right now to deliver sort of a presentation on making sure that police investigators are realizing how sort of simple it is
Mhm.
to modify files to create images and videos, and then a little bit of strategy around, I guess, the forensics of it. So yeah, we're
Right.
sort of partnering up on that, trying to get the word out, trying to educate as best we can, and then hope that as always, legislature can kind of put it together,
Right.
and package it in a way that allows law enforcement to be effective. Like you can
Yeah.
work all, it's so frustrating to put a lot of work into something and then realize now they're going to get away with it because of the letter of the law is is not being violated here.
Yeah. It was different, like, back when, before AI was becoming as prevalent as it was, we were already dealing with, um, you know, Japanese porn, hentai, the anime stuff, all that stuff. I mean, we knew we couldn't prosecute for that, but I could put my head down at night with a little bit of peace, knowing like, okay, like I understand that that's not a real person, it's a cartoon, and you can't prosecute it. I mean, I would still argue till I'm blue in the face that where there's smoke, there's fire, and that it's certainly like a precursor to
Sure,
future behavior. But I was able to accept the fact. But the AI images that we're seeing now are literally indistinguishable from that of which is a real person. And all of a sudden it's to the point where it's come to a head and it definitely needed to be addressed.
sure. So with that and many other things, education is a big piece of it for us to, for everyone to be able to take that step forward and keep fighting the good fight. Now, ICAC task forces, as you said before, are funded by the Department of Justice, some sort of federal money coming to you as a stipend of, you're going to get that money every year. You don't probably have to worry about it. It's definitely going to come. Perhaps asking for more, to get more resources.
Right.
As far as the education piece, it seems like you treat it more as a requirement, and a point of focus for holding educational forums for parents and kids. Can you explain a little bit about your effort there? Because I feel like, if we see this problem as something that we're never going to fix it, we're never going to be able to stop it, but we could educate around it, right, and hopefully save victims from ever being a victim.
Yeah.
That's a
It's a good way of putting it.
really important approach. So what can you share about your education efforts?
Yes, community outreach and education is one of those things that we can do that is a sort of a proactive approach. Unfortunately, so much of what we're doing is reactionary, whether it's, cyber tips that we're getting or things that are being reported to us after they've already happened, So again, I like to use the phrase constantly, but we do spend a lot of our time behind the eight ball. But other than like doing like an undercover chat operation or something like that, community outreach and education is a way in which we can proactively get out into the communities and really kind of have this at least how we do it in New Hampshire, and I know others do it very similar, is that just basically talking to as many as we can. So we have a specific presentation that's geared towards parents, geared towards teachers, social workers, people in DCYF, CACs, people who basically either are in charge of parenting or guiding or work with children on a regular basis. So we have one presentation for those folks, and that's more with the purpose of kind of making sure they understand exactly the landscape of what is out there, what our kids are facing every day, what we're seeing as investigators, just to kind of get us all on the same page, and then ways in which they, as people, whether they are parents or professionals, in which they can help fight the fight. And then we also have presentations that we recently kind of revamped for our needs. We have a separate middle school and high school presentation. And we recently, every year, we do this every fall, but we offer a train-the-trainer program for as many school resource officers as we can across the state, so they can learn how to teach these presentations and then get out into the schools and talk to these students, and give these presentations as well. Those are geared towards, social media safety. We certainly talk about sextortion, given that the number of cases that we've seen, it increases with sextortion cases. But again, making kids understand, aware of what's going on out there. And so that proactive approach is really, it's a way in which, like you said, that we can try to hopefully present something before it happens. I mean, it's not like we expect, 200 kids to walk out of an auditorium and screaming, I'm never going to share a nude again, like it's not going to happen, but
Right.
even if, 5 or 6 kids walk out of there, and if they pause before they hit that upload or accept button, whatever they're doing on social media, if they pause before that horse has left the barn, then, hopefully we're doing a good thing. And again, as the ICAC commander here in New Hampshire, if I had this magic bucket of money and this magic wand, I would invest a vast amount of that into being able to do more of our community outreach and education.
Yeah, I love that. It is unfortunate that there's limitations on being able to communicate these things to kids and to parents, and sometimes I feel like um, the uncomfortable conversation is just one that isn't had, and
Yeah,
that's why we're seeing maybe some of this extortion that are quickly turning into suicide. It's like this was a thing that everyone knew was a potential risk of your child might send a picture to someone at some point.
right.
But now, they have fallen into this, trust with some person on the internet, and then it turned into, being
Yeah,
extorted. And all of that is trying to be worked through and understood in this teenage brain, or this, this very young, not a lot of life experience brain, and then they feel trapped, right?
right,
And if we can just get around that and say, look, you messed up and it's okay, and run to your parents and say, I really messed up, here's what happened, and then just like work it out, right?
right.
um, Hate to hear those stories. 100% with you on trying to get that word out there, and
It's one of the,
soften it.
we talk to parents, it's one of the things we try to do is that, it's almost like we try very hard to give parents, to cut them a break a little bit. One of the examples I use when I'm doing a parent presentation is that, like there were many, many lessons that I learned as a kid that were taught to me by my parents that I knew were valuable lessons to teach my own kids. Look both ways before you cross the street. Don't touch the stove because it's hot, whatever. Like all those valuable lessons, you went through it as a kid, you knew to pass that on. But unfortunately, parents today are forced to navigate through waters that they didn't have to navigate through as children. So they don't necessarily have that experience to revert back to and talk about. So the default ends up becoming those scare tactics, like they tell their kids, here's your new phone, don't screw up with it, or I'm going to take it away from you and you'll never get another one.
Right.
It's like, so like in a sextortion case, when a kid is left with two choices, they share a nude image, they realize that they're getting extorted. Now they're seeing a message saying, send me $500 or I'm going to share this image with everyone in your contact list. So they got two choices: either send the $500 to hopefully make the problem go away, or they tell the parents, who are the same parents who scared them into, this decision, like that I've got a problem. So they make the decision to send the $500 because they don't want to lose their phone. So we really challenge parents to say, listen, be okay with not having the answer right away. You
Sure.
be okay with being vulnerable in that point of time, and try to create an environment at home where your kid feels safe to come talk to you when they get themselves in trouble, because the statistics show that it's going to be when, not if. It's going to be when they get themselves in a jam. You want them to be able to come to you and say, I need help. And
Sure.
we encourage them to create that environment.
Yeah, definitely. I've never heard someone put it the way that you just did. Of You're right. As you were parented, you weren't parented on this topic, and
Right,
we're going to be a couple generations until we sort of have that same message. It's like, oh, this is a thing that we all know. All of us experience this.
right.
To
Like, like kids, like when we tell kids, listen, be careful what you're sharing because you're never going to get that image back. They're not hearing anything that they don't already know. They know when they share it online, they're not going to get the image back. But kids process the way that they're processing it, that information, it's a risk versus reward process in their head. They know that there's a potential risk that they're going to be exposed in some way, shape, or form online, but it's worth the risk for them because the reward of getting the recognition they're seeking from their peers through likes or whatever, multiple sharing, whatever platform, more streaks on Snapchat, whatever it might be, the reward is greater for them. That's how they justify it in their head.
Sure.
And so they take that risk thinking that, well, I just hope it doesn't happen to me, and so when it does, that's that's the unfortunate piece.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think as a parent, I am sort of positioning myself as my kids are sort of aging into getting devices, that I expect to be disappointed, and
Yeah, yeah,
I'll try to be supportive first,
yeah.
and like, look, I hoped it
It's
wouldn't. It did.
and
Let's
it's a
see what.
hard message to tell parents too. Like a lot of parents will walk into a presentation thinking that in 90 minutes they're going to walk out of there having all the answers that they need and that their kids will be forever protected. And I say that as a precursor when I start. I'm like, listen, if this is what you're expecting, I hate to disappoint you, but you're not going to have that. You're not going to have all those tools in your tool belt. It's important that you're just aware of the issues. But please don't think that I'm going to be able to give you all the answers because I don't have them all.
Yeah,
you know,
there's no magic bullet for this
right,
one. It's definitely
right,
a complex thing, and I think education is definitely sort of the only approach that I think we can make a good impact on, at least the parenting standpoint.
right.
So moving on from the parent aspect, you talked about your affiliate agencies and some of them being small, under resourced, and honestly, and you don't want to say don't have the skill set, right? Like in policing, you'll have these brilliant investigators, right? Like I've
Yeah,
people that I worked with, and I'm like, if we have someone in the interview room, I want that guy asking the
right.
questions because there's just an art to how he approaches a person, right? You take that same person and say, hey, here's an ICAC case, send subpoenas, search warrants, you're going to get back these, zip files, and they're completely fumbling, right? They have no clue.
Yeah, right.
So how do you approach I guess the best practices in the education around those affiliates and trying to keep them up to speed with this ever evolving landscape?
So the best way that we do it is offering sort of shadowing opportunities whenever they want to take advantage of it. Again, and I'll use that overtime reimbursement as sort of that carrot on the stick. Like so. I can think of one example where there was some turnover at an agency that we is one of our affiliate agencies. Young detective just made it into detectives. His agency, because he showed interest, they got him hooked up, and so he's sort of going to be the contact person for that agency if they catch an ICAC related case. So in the initial part, he doesn't really, he's very green, but he's got an incredible amount of intelligence. He's highly motivated and he's got great energy. So as the commander for the task force, like that's energy that I want to harness and not lose.
Yeah,
So, I've told him, listen, if you want to come to the lab and shadow one of our forensic people for the day, I'll pay the 8 hours of overtime. If you want to come out in a search warrant, you don't have to have any responsibilities. You can just sort of be I'll give you the complete freedom to go around and you can see how we're doing things. If you want to sit second chair on an interview, you can do that. Like it's I want to give them opportunities to succeed and experience success, because again, it's something that I can figure out as a manager, where exactly would this person best be utilized. I've got great interviewers who would make terrible forensic examiners and vice versa.
sure.
It is what it is, like, so a lot of times I've had people walk in and say, yeah, I would love to be a part of ICAC, but they just don't exactly know they want to what they want to do, and they don't exactly have the full gamut of what it entails.
Yeah.
So I'll try to expose them to as much as I can, and then kind of help blossom that as best as my abilities it will allow. But it's again, it's a constant challenge. We have 90 different affiliate agencies here in New Hampshire that are affiliated with ICAC in some way, shape, or form. So it's a constant moving target.
Yeah, I imagine for every one of those green, excited, new investigators that you get to see, they have their own administration that see them as that,
Mhm.
like, talented, and so to say, wait, hang on, how much of this person do I want to let go to some other resource, right?
Yeah, and you'd be hard pressed to find an ICAC commander out there, an ICAC supervisor who hasn't been burned in the past, where it's like you got a person who has great energy, great intelligence, great enthusiasm, checks all the boxes. and you get them all trained up, you give them a ton of forensic abilities, and then they leave. They leave the agency, or they go to wherever. And sometimes it's like, I can think of, it just happened to me a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the person left, and he's now working for his city's IT department. And it's like, well, I'm so glad I just invested that thousands of dollars for your Cellebrite training. But you it comes with the territory. It is what it is. And you
Yeah.
know you'd get the same type of response from chiefs of police in smaller agencies. They come, they invest the money, they send the kid to the academy, they work for a couple of years, and then they leave and they go to a larger agency. It happens, or they go federal, whatever it might be.
Right. So as you were saying the last part, I was thinking about my old, let's see, he was my captain and major. He's the colonel now at the place where I worked. His sort of mentality towards canines, he's always a little bit frustrated with, like, a dog.
Yeah.
It's this much money, and we got to build a kennel, and that person gets all this extra time to do training, and
Right.
as a resource, pulled away from a normal patrol or investigative spot. But they had this beautiful purpose of, but the dog does this thing. So I understand that you have a dog. So tell us a little bit about Nico.
So Nico was a great addition to our repertoire, our staff. So Nico is an ESD canine. So ESD is electronic storage detection. We got him from Jordan Detection Canine out in Indiana. We selected one of our investigators, who's actually he's been with the task force the longest out of any of us. And he was selected to be the Nico's canine handler. So Nico has been a valuable asset to the team simply because of being able to locate that electronic, the evidence. So, and just kind of a funny story, there was always a process in terms of how we executed our search warrants, and assigning a couple searchers to a room, and, they would search the room, and then they would sign off on the sheet saying that, yes, Eric and Jared searched this room, the room's good to go. And then whoever's kind of running point on the search warrant would go around room to room and say, all right, is this room done? Yep, Jared and Eric searched it, so it'd be good to go. And then we'd run the dog. And the dog was always inevitably finding more evidence that, the cops were missing. So because we were so concerned about bruising cops' egos, we had to insert Nico into the process a little bit earlier. So so Nico's been great. He's been involved in over 200 and close to 270 warrants at this point, since we've had him, and he's located evidence just about at every single one of them.
Awesome.
And because he's part lab, and he's half lab, half golden retriever, and so his demeanor is such that he's extremely chill and very, very mellow. So it's nice. He's almost a double threat because Nico's also a trained therapy dog.
Mm-hmm.
So when Maddie will come by the lab with Nico, Nico will be off leash and be able to kind of have the freedom to wander. So, it's our, God love our forensic team and the guys that have to, view this material on a regular basis. You're talking about, thousands and thousands of images a day practically. And so to have Nico kind of walk into their space and be able to play with them and play fetch and kind of wrestle on the ground or whatever. It's nice that it gives our investigators a little bit of a mental break. There's been plenty of times too, unfortunately, just because of the nature of these warrants, that we're basically, upheaving an entire family in a matter of minutes, when devastation. And sometimes, despite our best efforts, the kids themselves are on scene and devastated by what's going on, and they're scared because they see police everywhere. And Nico's been crucial in those elements as well, to be able to kind of give the kids a little bit of a break. And so he's been such a crucial and important part of our team. It's been great to have him.
Yeah, really awesome perspective on it. It's very interesting to see the therapy aspect, and I can definitely rewind some of the warrants that I was on, and that, like, oh man, there's a kid here we didn't know about, right?
Yeah, right.
Here we all stand big and tall, and this poor kid is now traumatized by us,
Right.
plus whatever was happening before. But it's really neat to see how I guess Nico's playing that part. What I hear from you is when it's Nico's time to retire, one, probably get an awesome retirement party, but that you'll probably reinvest
Yeah.
in another. It's a
Oh, I
personal.
would say most definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, 100%. I mean, he's a proven entity for 100%, for, like I said, for all the reasons I just listed. But it gets to the point now when if something happens where we don't, and if Maddie and Nico aren't available, like if they're away at training, we don't want to run the risk of possibly missing any evidence that we could obtain. So we have a great relationship with our surrounding states. And who also have ESD canines, and they're more than willing to offer and a lending hand, and they'll come to our warrants as well if they need to kind of fill on that spot. Because
Yeah.
I mentioned before how our suspects are getting more and more creative and savvy every single day, and so it's not like we walk into a search warrant and all the evidence we need is sitting right there on the living room table. They're very good at hiding it, in keeping it in a way, and just because of how the dog's brain works and how they're rewarded, the dogs will just search. Humans have a tendency, if we're searching someplace, we'll sometimes dismiss it and be like, oh, there's no way there's anything hidden there, and then we'll walk by. But dogs don't have that deductive reasoning the way that humans do. They just love to work based on how they're trained, and so
Sure.
it's nice to know that you're doing everything you can to obtain that evidence.
So as you talked about Nico walking around and sort of checking in with people in the lab and people getting that mental break from the images and the stuff that they're unfortunately having to look at, how do you tackle the mental health of your forensic examiners, of your investigators? Because even if they're not looking at the images, if they're more of the on-scene interview, the scenes and the people and the story is always a little bit rough, right? This is either,
Right.
as you said, upending a family of everything seemed normal, and now you're telling them no, it's really not. Dad was doing this. Or to the other end of the scale of sitting in the lab for 6 hours a day, scrolling images and marking them and doing really concise reports to put the bad guy away, but still the exposure. How are you handling that?
Um, it's a challenge for sure. So we'll do the very best we can to offer um, different ways in which mental health can be addressed. Whether we have whether it's through shift, which is popular, with the ICAC task force program. Shift wellness is great in terms of offering different programs, and they'll come out to different, to your state, and offer programs and seminars for ICAC investigators. There's also a local agency here in New Hampshire that we deal with called Forge VFR. So VFR is for veterans and first responders. So they're great. They're fantastic. We just had one that we hosted last month. We didn't necessarily get the attendance that I would have liked to have seen, which for me in New Hampshire is a little challenging because at the end of the day, although they're task force members, they're still, they work for their own agency. So I can't necessarily make it mandatory for them to attend because they follow the policies and procedures of their own agency. But the best I can do is kind of offer up a variety of different opportunities for them as best I can. And then also just trying to, little things sometimes make a difference too, whether it's, the ability to flex their schedule, if they're in the lab, I don't care if they come in a bathrobe and slippers. If you're comfortable working, then have at it. It's make no difference to me. If you need to cut out, an hour early, no problem. I'm not that type of manager. I don't like believe in that micromanaging like that way. I want to do whatever I can to help my people just do whatever they can and give them whatever they need to succeed, including, whatever they need for mental health. Your kid's got a baseball game and you need to cut out early, have at it. It's totally fine. But it's a challenging, and I was talking before about vulnerability, and I'm not shy about admitting, when I do like the intros at the different seminars that we'll offer, as the commander, I'll kind of do like a brief intro and I'll introduce whoever's hosting it. But I'm not shy admitting, myself. I'm like, listen, I seek, I seek a therapist and talk to a therapist on a regular basis myself. And one of the things that we always try to stress is that I think as cops that by default, you think that you naturally need to kind of prepare for that massive event, that's going to be the one that's going to be the tipping point that you're going to have PTSD from, or, some type of stress-induced trauma from, whether it's an officer-involved shooting or a tragic accident, or whatever it might be, and while that's possibly true, what we've learned over the years is that, you know, we are very good at stuffing our own feelings and keeping things stuff down inside. And so because we do that so well, a lot of times it's a little thing that will put you over the edge, not necessarily the big thing.
Yeah.
And you miss the green light and you get stuck at a red light. Next thing you know, like you just lose you lose your mind. It's like
Right.
that was the tipping point. That was, you had built enough pressure up in that pressure cooker where you had to bleed off some steam. And so it's important that we're aware of that, as investigators, for sure.
Yeah, I feel like it's a tall task, and I kind of go back to how we talked about education before, of policing. Let's say 10 years ago, it wasn't so cool to talk about your feelings, right? I
Mhm.
feel like the general mentality was, no, pack it, like you're strong, just
Right,
keep packing it down in there, and you'll find more space no matter what.
right,
And then last week, talking with an ICAC group, and the general message from the commander was, talk to anyone. You see me, you have anything going on, please come talk to me, right? And
right,
so it's softened, and I think it's softened in certainly the most appropriate way, to allow people to be vulnerable. And
right,
that's not a word that cops like to use, right? Like, oh,
right.
just be vulnerable, talk to somebody, or it's okay to not be okay. But I love that you're doing it. I love that you're saying it, and that you're teaching it. And I hope that's happening at scale, because that is certainly something that when I lived it, it was not the popular thing to do. It was sort of new, of like, hey, we're going to do this therapy thing, and everyone kind of made fun of it and didn't want to do it, right?
Right.
Whereas now it's, I think, a lot more acceptable. So thanks to, I guess, you and all the other commanders and the people sort of pushing that effort, because I think we're seeing with the time, that it's becoming the normal thing, which
Yeah,
is
it's become a very accepted practice, like within the ICAC task force program as a whole. Like it's something that, we as commanders meet twice a year, for our commanders meetings. We talk about it for what we're doing for our task forces, but it's also important, like we also address that what we're doing for each other.
yeah,
We have our own wellness group that we talk about, because at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference where that stress is coming from. What makes a difference is how you're managing it, and everyone manages it differently, and everyone's levels in terms of how much they can tolerate varies constantly. I mean, who knows what's going on? I mean, if you got a lot going on in your personal life at that time, something very, almost innocuous can happen at work. But again, that's the tipping point. But
yeah,
if the scales are different, where you've got nothing going on at home and things great and everything's happy, you don't have a lot of that stress going on at that time in your life, in your personal life, then you can maybe handle a little bit more in your professional life.
sure,
It's constantly trying to make sure that you're aware of how those scales are balanced.
yeah. Well, thank you for the work you're doing. That sounds like, as a person that you would be managing, it would be a good place to be, to have you as commander for the affiliates. It sounds like you are offering a lot of resources, and training, and just on the job or otherwise, to further this mission. So thank you for joining this today and sharing your
I
perspective. It's certainly
appreciate the
unique,
opportunity.
and I wish you the best of luck up there in New Hampshire, fighting the good fight. And for everyone that joined to listen, thank you so much. And we will be coming back with another UpLIFT episode sometime soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jared.